how much time? Great. Is in the Armenian Patriarchate in Isfahan. There was this idea, and of course, again, we are talking about pre-modern states. So the idea of sovereignty, the idea of territory, the idea of controlling and governing populations is very, very different from what we'll have in the 19th century with the rise of the nation state. So the idea of asking a foreign power to spend some money in a population that you don't care that much, it was not very, very problematic. In the 19th century, this idea of protection will be resurrected, but with a total different dynamics. Because, of course, the power relations was different, and European powers would claim, would, of course, impose capitulations to the Ottoman Empire, that means treaties to the Ottoman Empire, and in these treaties they would receive the role of protectors of certain populations of the empire on the basis of religions. So the French became protectors of the Catholics, which were already a very large population in the Ottoman Empire. Russia became the protector of the Orthodox, of course, and England, the main power, had a big problem. There were no enough Protestants to protect. Very bad situation. So in the beginning, it starts trying to protect the Druze, but then it doesn't work out very well because the Druze were interested in a lot of stuff, but not into British interference into their issues. And then later on, Britain becomes the official protector of the Jews of the empire, with the consequences that we know in the 20th century. So these religious protections, they became an instrument of interference into the internal affairs of the empire by the European powers. And in the 19th century, a lot of possibilities of interference will appear, because those populations were richer. The non-Muslims, they became very rich with the commerce with Europe. They were exposed to modern ideas of citizenship, modern ideas of European power. They were protected by powers that they perceived as more powerful than their own empire. So and of course, they also were connected to different kinds of religiosity. With the Catholic missionaries comes a different kind of religiosity, which was much more public, much more assertive in the public sphere, which were, of course, the kind of religiosity you could find in Europe. So a lot of incidents appear after, by the middle of the 19th century. The first one is in Aleppo in 1850, when there is the inauguration of the Melkite Church. And the Melkites, they do a procession throughout the city, through the souks, until they reach the new church. And according to the chronicles of the time, not only Muslims, but also Jewish chronicles, the exhibition of the crucifix with the Christ on the cross was very offensive to the Muslims, who, of course, were very shocked to see the inscription of Christianity in the public sphere, which was not the previous case before. So there were riots, and the Christian neighborhoods of Aleppo were attacked. There were killings. The Pasha intervened. But of course, this was an incident that allowed the French to start being more assertive in the idea that they had, if the Ottoman state did not protect the Christians, they would protect the Christians. Before that, in 1840, there was the Damascus affair, when Jews were accused of killing a Franciscan missionary for ritual purposes. And then later on, it was discovered they were arrested, they were tortured, and later on, they were discovered to be innocent. Of course, the Franciscan was alive and nothing had happened to him. Then again, England presented itself as the main defender. in this time against the Ottoman state. So the idea, then you start constructing the idea that the Ottoman state was oppressive, was arbitrary, it has no justice, of course, so therefore those populations need to be protected by direct intervention. And the main episode is the massacres of 1860, when Christian Maronite peasants revolt against Druze landlords. They start attacking the Druze, then the Druze react and then start killing the Christians. And the killing spread throughout the Shuf and nearby areas. Many Christians flee to Damascus, they arrive in Damascus, and then there were, meanwhile, there was a French intervention. A French Navy intervenes in Beirut in order to officially to stop the killings. And of course, news of the interventions make that the riots start in Damascus with rumors that the French were on the way to Damascus, and the Christians of Damascus are also killed and massacred. And of course, it's important to point that not everybody participated in the massacres, and a major Muslim religious and political figure, Sheikh Abdel Qadir Juzair, who was exiled in Syria by the French. He protected the Christians in his own house, but of course there was vicious attack against Christian property and Christian life. So this internal collapse of the traditional order in the Ottoman Empire, the violent disputes around the moral order of society become an instrument for intervention by foreign powers in the Ottoman Empire. And of course, these made things worse for the non-Muslim minorities in the empire. And all this, and I'll be ending here, occurs in a context where the Ottoman Empire itself is trying to reform not only its political order, but also recognize that the moral order of society must be different. So it's the Tanzimat, which was already mentioned here by Arlene, which more or less roughly goes from 1839 to 1876. So 1845, there's a parliament. 1856, there is the Hati Humayun decree, which gives equality between Muslims and non-Muslims. So in 1856, the social, legal, and juridical differences between Muslims and non-Muslims is officially abolished. And there was, of course, fierce, and you can see that is in the middle of all these violent confrontations, because you have the traditional moral order crumbling, and efforts from some groups to keep it intact, and other groups to erase it completely. And of course, it allowed a dispute between the Ottoman state itself and foreign powers in order to see who will control and frame this process. So this decree was resisted by Muslims, of course, but also by non-Muslims. The Christians, in particular, resisted a lot the idea of equality, because, on the other hand, would mean that the church would lose its power, the Orthodox Church would lose its power as a main instrument of governance of Christians. But also, Christian populations were not happy, because equality meant also possibility of conscription in the army. And conscription in the army was seen as something very, very, very bad, because it would take you away from your work and from your family. And of course, the army before the invention of penicillin was a very deadly affair. So many people would die, of course, and they would be in the different places, the wars that were happening. So, of course, there was a strong resistance to this idea of equality. In 1869, again, equality is tried again with the idea of Ottoman nationality. 1876, the Ottoman Constitution. And then there is the autocratic coup d'etat by Abdul Hamid II that ends the Tanzimat, and basically try to recreate the previous social order based on Islamic moral construction of what society should be. And in this period, of course, and it was said already, the efforts of centralization, the marginalization of local elites. Of course, you have the beginnings of Arab nationalist thinking, the debate of Arab nationalism. But what very few people know is that this debate started within the Orthodox Church. From the mid-19th century on, there is a fierce debate in the Orthodox Church about basically the Antiochian Church as was ruled by a Greek patriarch and Greek bishops who ruled over Arabic-speaking priests and Arabic-speaking congregations. Of course, for local families, administration and the church were opportunities for jobs, for good positioning. So you have two sons, one going to administration, the other go to the church for the Christian families, you know. So and that was the attraction of the Catholic missionaries. They allowed a full hierarchy of Arabic-speaking bishops and an Arabic-speaking patriarch. So with this contrast with the Uniate Church, there's this debate in the Orthodox Church that why we have to be ruled by Greek monks and Greek bishops and a Greek patriarch. And this debate is more or less simultaneous with the beginnings of the debate of Arab language, of the Nahda, and it will inform a lot the idea that the language is related to the idea of a people, of the constitution of a people, of a culture, of ethnicity. And this debate will rage in the Orthodox Church until 1898, when there is the election of the first Arabic patriarch. And for those who are interested in this history, Russian historians dealt with this question, but it's very, that's why it's not very, you need to know Arabic and Russian, two very easy languages for us. So because of course they were making petitions to Russia, which was the power that protected the Orthodox Christian, to Russia to intervene in the church and allow the election of an Arab patriarch. And to end, of course, there is the relationship between nationalism and religion, and nowhere this relationship was, because of course Arab nationalism from the beginning was a secular nationalism, because it started with Christians thinking about it. So of course the Christians knew that they needed to convince Muslims to adhere to the idea. So Arab nationalism was created in a very ethnic linguistic basis. Religion was just an element. Islam was accepted as part of the cultural heritage of Arabs, but not as the religion of Arabs. So the idea that being Arab is not being Muslim. Al-din lillah wal-watan al-shab. The religion belongs to God and the nation belongs to the people. But not all nationalism were like that. So the Armenian nationalism is the nationalism where religion and national ideas would go together, and being Armenian was being Christian. And the Armenians, who were a large population, concentrated in some parts of Anatolia, but also spread throughout the Ottoman cities, they start seeing, of course, asking for autonomy. As autonomy would never come, they would start also asking for, or agitating for independence. And the closeness to Russia and to Russian Armenia also emboldened them in their idea that they could maybe have some Russian help in becoming independent. So the Armenians were treated very harshly by the Ottomans since the beginning. So, and of course, Armenian nationalists, they were the first ones to enter into a violent armed struggle against the Ottoman state. So, for instance, in 1896, an Armenian commando takes the Ottoman central bank and threatened to explode the bank with all the golden reserve that it has in the bank if some Armenian intellectuals who were arrested would not be freed. And Armenian nationalists, of course, would not be freed. In the end, they don't explode the bank, but there is this unleash of anti-Armenian violence that was allowed and actually promoted by the Ottoman administration in many provinces and in Istanbul itself. So Armenians were massacred throughout the empire. And what is called the Armenian questions drags into maybe the most problematic nationalist demand within the Ottoman Empire, because it was also a religious nationalist demand. It was not just the idea that you could give linguistic rights to them. They wanted really self-governance within religious nationalism framework. And I will finish because, of course, there is the Committee of Union and Progress that starts imposing Turkish and nationalism in the empire after 1908, and the First World War, when the Armenians are seen by the Committee of Union and Progress, the three pashas who actually governed the empire, as a kind of possible traitors of the empire. It is true that the Armenian nationalists, they were in contact with the Russians. There was a Russian intervention that goes into Van, and the Armenians take this opportunity to declare their independence, but the Russians retreat. And as the Russians retreat, the Ottoman government decides to take a final solution to the Armenian issue, and it's the beginning of the Armenian genocide on 24 of April 1915, when a series of Armenian intellectuals is assassinated in Istanbul, and then there is the orders of removing all the Armenian population from Anatolia, taking it into Syria and into Aleppo first, and then from Aleppo march into Deir Zor, and those who arrived in Deir Zor were exterminated. So it's the first modern genocide recognized by very few countries nowadays, and from more or less 2 million Armenian population of the empire, 1.5 million Armenians are exterminated in this process, either in the death marches, either in the camps, either in killings in the cities and in the villages, etc. Of course, the numbers are not precise. So the empire ends with actually the full collapse of its efforts in creating a new formula of religious coexistence. But what we can see, and I'll finish with that, how religion was a key arena for the transformation, for the political and social transformations of the Ottoman Empire. The whole process had in the religious field more or less an arena for expressing not only its processes of change, but also its deep tensions and its deep divisions by the society and by the political forces of the empire. Then